Good morning, everybody.
All right, friends, here we are. Uh, Thanks for coming this morning. Hopefully, you've enjoyed your month of July and will celebrate its timely passing later today on to August, which means it's time for school and sports and all kinds of. Uh, we are cruising right along. If you can't see the board, because the marker was pretty, we're going to be starting in Mark 12 and Luke 21, and eventually we'll get over to Matthew 24. And I'll just let you know, did not have a fantastic morning. Debated whether I should cancel or not. I decided I could do it. So I'm not ill, just be So, yeah, Mark chapter 12, verse 41. It is pretty much the same as Luke 21, 1 through 4. I'll throw both of those out there, but we're only going to read the Mark text because it's longer and has more information, and Luke doesn't have anything different. You have heard this story before if you've been in church for more than 20 minutes. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in two very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." Uh, is there anybody who has never heard that story before? You never heard about the widow and the two mites? It would be hard to imagine because it seems like that gets thrown around a lot, even in non-church circles occasionally. But um, So I don't feel like I have a great deal of deep insight to share, but I do want to talk about a few things. As you recall, hopefully, during this last week of Jesus's life, he's spending the evenings and the nights in Bethany and then walking over into Jerusalem every morning to spend the day there. He is typically in temple courts. Um, so uh, he has had a chance so far in this week to have conversations with Pharisees and with the Sadducees and with the crowds, with the disciples. Um, uh, you might remember that. So in the on the Temple Mount, where the temple and all of the courts are, um, there. So if it's in the big picture of Jerusalem, that's facing west from the Mount of Olives. You're looking at that corner wall, the closest to us. That's the temple corner, and Herod's temple would have been big. He made that complex much bigger than it had ever been before, and there were colonnades, series of columns with roofs, all that went all the way around the temple compound, and there was various levels of courts. There's the court of the Gentiles, and then it got smaller to the court of the women, and then smaller was the court of Israel, and then the closest was where the priests would go into the temple. So Jesus is is probably in the court of women here, because that's where he could have a co-ed audience of people. Or at least somewhere between the outermost court and the court of women. Inside the courtyard, there were some apartment kind of buildings, some storage rooms. So when people brought offerings, they would go into those rooms to be stored. And in front of that is where people brought their offering. So the descriptions are a little vague, that there is a large box, and on the box there is a trumpet-shaped, I guess, funnel. And the only thing that I can think about is in the mall where they have the great big box, and you put your nickels on the little slot, and you let them go, and they go, you roll all the way around. I don't think that these are probably quite that big, but that's the image that I have in my head. People are putting their shekels in there and watching them roll all the way to the bottom. It's not clear if it's like one great big box or a series of smaller boxes, but in multiple places it talked about the fact that there were 13 of these trumpet depositories attached to an offering box. So, because you've got lots of people who are bringing, their regular temple taxes, plus if they're bringing any other kind of gifts to God, they're all going to go in there. So Jesus is sitting there and he's watching the people come by. He likes people. He's interested in what's going on. He sees people bringing in their purse or their wallet and they're throwing the stuff in. Lots of big gifts. I've heard some preachers in the last 50 years go on and on about, the Pharisees bringing in their, they've had everything converted into nickels. So it really looks like it's a big offering and it makes a lot of noise. It's just dropping into that box, just shook down into it. Just, nope, I'm almost done. I'm on, end of bag number 1 now. But anyway, I don't know if any of that's true, but there are people bringing very large gifts, very wealthy people making these kind of offerings. And then Jesus notices that woman comes. I don't know what it is about her that catches his eye. I don't know if she's, a wrinkled up old raisin of a widow who's 1,000 years old, who's kind of shuffling up, or what. But he notices her and he sees what she drops into the offering box. Now, the NIV says that she is poor. Okay. Probably some of you, like me, as you look back at your childhood, you realize, hey, you know what? We were poor. We just didn't know it. She's beyond poor. The word usually means needy. It's possible that she is a woman who has been forced to beg in order to stay afloat. So she's not just on the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder. She can't even get to the ladder. She's a destitute woman. And so she drops in these 2 coins. The NIV calls them copper coins. All the dictionaries and everything, all the research material says that they're made out of bronze, which is not, you can't make one without the other. And the coins are called leptons. They are the smallest coin available during Jesus's day, and they're worth somewhere between 1/8 and 1/5 of a cent, depending on who you believe. So take a penny and cut it up into slivers, and that's how much it's worth. It is not enough to buy much of anything. So you do the math there. It's potentially true that what she drops in there is worth a quarter of a cent. That is enough in her day to buy like one or two grapes or maybe a piece of bread from a loaf. In our modern day loaves of bread, there's typically 20 slices. And so she can get maybe one or two with the amount of money she's dropping in. It would probably be true that if you have a brass button on your clothes this morning, it is worth more than the coin that she's putting in there. And so when Jesus says that this is all she has to live on, I don't think he's exaggerating. That this really is anything and everything that she's managed to scrounge up to make this offering. And so when Jesus sees this taking place, the high rollers coming in and dropping their big bags of money into the boxes, one after the other, and the big ones and small ones, and everybody's laughing and talking and doing all that kind of stuff that they would usually do. This woman grabs his attention. He sees what's going on. He knows what's going on. And so he calls to the disciples, hey, come over here. You need to see this. I want you to watch this. There's an important example and lesson here for them about giving. And it sort of seems like the basis for the lesson, the heart of the lesson is that the means of the giver and the motivation for the gift are everything. The means of the giver and the motivation for the gift are everything. The people who have gone before have great means. They live in a great big house on the bench. They're driving an SUV, and they have two side by sides and a boat in the driveway, and they drop in a check for $500. This woman can't even afford to get to the lantern house, and she gives everything that she has in the offering. Why? Because she wants to give it to God. The means of the giver and motivation for the gift mean everything. Now, Jesus is looking down the road, and he knows that in really just a matter of a few days, he will be out of the picture. And certainly in a few months, these disciples are going to be the leaders of the church. And so it feels like this is an important lesson, especially based on everything we've seen in the last couple of chapters where Jesus has really been roasting the Pharisees for their love for the attention and prestige and power. Everything is all about appearances to them. And Jesus kind of takes this as a contrast to say, they're doing a nice thing, but this lady, she really is giving deeply. That's what he wants them to remember when it comes to things like offerings, that it's the condition of the heart that matters more than the size of the portfolio. I think there's probably another lesson, another application as well, that goes beyond just trying to teach the disciples about generosity and giving. Jesus says that this woman is giving everything that she has to live on. And if this is happening on Tuesday, Jesus knows that in 3 days, he's going to be giving up everything as well. So this is sort of like a kind of like a little object lesson about what's about to occur. What do you think? Any comments or questions about that?
That was very well explained, James.
I don't want to say. Because just when you think you don't have it, when you think
Just when you think you don't have anything more to give, you do have something you can give.
This was total and complete 100%. There were no reservations.
Well, if one of the things that we've been talking about in Sunday morning sermons is, about the sacrifices on the altars. This lady is not giving away the leftovers and the extra pieces that she doesn't care about. This is the entirety of her wealth. She really is laying it all on the altar. It's a nice little lesson. It's not very big and only shows up in Mark and Luke. Matthew and John don't have it. But it's important for us to remember that when we give, obviously we can only give out of our means. We can't give more than we have. But the reason that we give, our motivation for giving really does matter. Want to make sure that we're not thinking a little too more highly of ourselves than we ought to when we're giving to God. Okay. Well, let's roll on then.
How do you feel about, before you off the subject, how do you feel about giving to people that are begging on the street?
How do I feel about giving to people who are begging on the
I
street?
don't want to put you on the spot. I have.
That is something that our family typically has done. Not every time. I mean, there have occasionally been circumstances in which we really didn't feel like maybe it was the right move at that moment.
Do you think kind of God lets you know, or the Holy Spirit lets you know when it's genuine?
I think so. I know that there have been times when I've seen somebody or heard somebody, encountered somebody who was looking for a little help and did the blind eye thing. I got busy looking at my phone or looking at the traffic in the other lane or whatever, and pull away from there, walk away from there going, oh, you suck. You need to go back and do something. You should have helped. You should go make something happen. So just go fix that. I don't believe that's just having a guilty conscience. I have a belief that is God going, hey, yep, back there.
but some of them live better than you do.
There are people who are in those circumstances who are taking advantage of it, and they drive to work and they drive home. But there are people who are really obviously definitely in need. And I one of the things that I hope for and wish for and try to develop is a better sense of wisdom and discernment about that. You know, if I could ask for any superpower, it would be that my BS-o-meter was flawless. Because I always fall down on the side of grace. You know, I don't know if they're telling me the truth or not. I try to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. And so I will try to help, which is one of the reasons why a few years ago, with our Helping Hands ministry, I said, look, it can't be me because I will give something to everybody who walks in the door. And so we put together a little group of people. We worked on some guidelines, some softer than me, some harder than me, and hopefully found a pretty good balance. Jackie has done a really great job. Her meter works great. She can always tell when there's something else going on. But you know, I sort of feel like if I've got extra money in my pocket and I'm probably just going to blow it on something dumb anyway, if I can maybe help somebody out a little bit, even if it's $3 or $4, that's all I've got in my pocket. That's probably a good thing to do that.
You remember years ago when right there where we're sitting, we had the food bank,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know whether you was here then or not. But, yeah, but
Yep.
we had a fellow, maybe you remember him, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had some families when we were doing a food pantry here, that were frequent flyers. We were their grocery store every
week.
2 or 3 or 4 weeks anyway.
Yeah.
And they would call and say, this is Joe. Hey, this is Jose. This is Joseph. This is Jay. You know, like,
Yeah,
we know it's you, dude. So
I
yeah.
have a big one out in North Ogden that you almost have to see to believe. People park in their Escalades and their Suburbans, lining the street, get their wagons out, unfold them, and walk
Wow.
down and fill up on everything.
When
It's crazy.
a couple weekends ago, Stacy and I went to the farmers market in Ogden, and I stopped at one of the booths because I was kind of intrigued by it, and I realized that's probably something that we should talk about here, and I have failed to do it so far. You know, we have the blessing boxes in Roy and Riverdale and some other places where people can bring non-perishable stuff and leave it in there for anybody who needs it. And people come by, they don't have to qualify for anything. If they need some help, they can find something there. Well, so that's all non-perishable food. There is a group in Weber County, and I think it's just called the Weber freezer, the Weber fridge, or something like that. That it is all perishable stuff. So you can bring in meat and cheese and fruit and dairy products. You know, people can come there and get stuff as well. I have some information someplace in the mess on my desk, but I did not know that existed. And so that might be some way that some folks can help here. I want to try to help out with that. So
I used to work in Salt Lake.
Oh.
There's millions of them there, and I see them, and I get this little feeling in my heart with that one person, and I would give something to them, and I didn't care what they did with it, but it made me feel so good. But if they had a dog, I gave.
Yeah, let's get the dog was that.
So if they've got a mangy dog, they will always get help.
Silence. That somebody dropped me on the corner and take my leg in the wheelchair down around the corner and.
what is it we read later on, that God loves a cheerful giver? Being generous is like, it's, God is a generous giver. We should be a generous giver as well. Whether it's giving to support ministry or trying to help others who are in need. So, I mean, it'll be a really awesome story, and probably The Chosen has done this, but to take this woman and Jesus will go over and help her out and multiply some groceries in a bag or something. I don't know. Anyway, so there you are, the poor widow and her two little copper coins. And now in the next chapter, things get kind of hairy.
Oh,
I've not been looking forward to the rest of our discussion, just because I don't have any great answers for most of it. So
why you was gonna lay off today, huh?
no, because I'd have to do it next week anyway. So one of the things that I typically do with when I'm putting my Bible study together, when Matthew, Mark, and Luke have the same account, I'll put them in a table side by side, 3 columns. Sometimes John too, if he's playing nice. And then I'll go through and sort of mark what's the same and what's different. So this is just 2 of the pages. Somehow I misnumbered the pages, and so I'm missing the first one. But crying out loud. Nothing is working physically this morning. So there's another one of these for Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. And so you can kind of see the stripes go across each of the 3 columns. There's a lot of shared material, but there are some things that not everybody includes. And it's I don't have a good answer for why Matthew says something and Mark doesn't, or Luke does not and Matthew does. I don't have a great answer for that, only to say they must have had their own reason. Probably it's based on a couple of things. One would be who they're writing to, who the audience is. So, if I'm talking to this group about something, I'm going to include different sorts of things than I will if I'm talking to the youth group. Or if I'm at the HOA meeting and I'm talking to my neighbors there, I may try to give the same information, but the audience, the setting will kind of dictate the illustrations and the things that I emphasize. The other thing that would probably have an influence there is the source of the information. So in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Matthew and John are the only 2 disciples. Matthew, the tax collector, and John, the brother of James, fisherman, probably the baby of the group, the disciple that Jesus loved according to his gospel. And so they would have a slightly different view of events than Mark and Luke would. Luke is a physician, an educated man who in his gospel and the book of Acts is trying to put together like the whole story, soup to nuts, to try to show somebody that Jesus is the Son of God and the Savior of the world. Mark is most likely the traditional understanding is that he is a companion of Simon Peter, and that so when Peter tells stories about what he experienced, Mark will write them down. So he's got like secondhand information. Luke is doing research, whereas Matthew and John are just remembering what things were like years earlier. So
Would they have spoke different languages?
yes, but all together. All of them would have probably been born speaking Aramaic, which is sort of like New Wave Hebrew. All the languages in the Middle East have some really common roots. Hebrew and Arabic, and some of the other things are there. They would share a lot of overlap because they're in the same place at the same time. Aramaic was the language of the Arameans up in the north, and they were conquerors, and they brought their culture and language and stuff in, and it kind of merged with the Hebrew people. But they also would have all spoken Greek, even though the Romans are from Italy and their language is Latin, and they're ruling most of the world at that point. Everybody is speaking Greek because the Greeks had been there 300 years earlier with Alexander. And so Greek culture had kind of taken over everything. So they would have all been able to speak and understand Aramaic and Greek and maybe even Latin, some of them. Like at the end on the cross, the sign is about Jesus of Nazareth is written in 3 different languages, so nobody misunderstands the point. So I have to figure out where I am again. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke all include in about the same spot in their Gospels what is often called the Olivet Discourse. It's from the Mount of Olives. So in the scheme of things daily, this is probably still Tuesday. Sunday, he came in on the donkey, triumphant entry into the city. Monday, he's cleaning out the temple and doing a bunch of teaching. That's Monday. Tuesday, he's in the temple courts again, wrestling with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and teaching people and watching this thing happen with the offering. And now at the end of the day, they're coming out of the city, down the hill, down to the Kidron Valley, across the little creek that runs there, and then working their way back up the Mount of Olives. Eventually they will cross the peak of the Mount of Olives, which is mountain is an overstatement. The hill, the big hill there, to get to Bethany. So as they're coming up, you'd be looking at the same. This is the same view that Jesus would have as is in that picture. This is taken from the Mount of Olives. You're looking out towards the west. It is evening. The sun is setting, and you can just kind of imagine what that sunset looks like behind the holy city, behind the temple. They've just come from a great day there. They've heard all these great things that Jesus has taught. They are country boys still. They're from, like for us, they would be, good old boys from Texas or something like that. No, they're just regular people. They don't get out much. And so these young guys from out of town come into the Jerusalem. I mean, they've been there for a few days, but they're still sort of overwhelmed by the size of the temple and all of the stuff that's going on, the buildings and the apartments and the offerings and the animals and all this stuff that's going on. And they make some comments about it. And then as they're kind of, I don't know, sort of musing on that as they go along, they get to the Mount of Olives and Jesus sets them down. So I guess we should probably read what the text says before going forth. Matthew 24 is probably the best place for us to read, at least for a while. Matthew 24:1, Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. Do you see all these things? He asked. Truly, I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be torn down. In Mark and in Luke, on their accounts, there's a little bit more that the disciples add there. Mark says one of the disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." Luke says that the disciples were remarking about how beautiful, how the temple was adorned with beautiful stones and with gifts that God. So they're sort of enamored with the whole deal. It's big and it's impressive and it's beautiful, as you would expect that the temple would be, a temple dedicated to God. And then Jesus says, I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be torn down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, his disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Jesus answered, watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, claiming I'm the Messiah, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Then you'll be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you'll be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let's read and understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back and get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be repeated, never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or there he is, don't believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you ahead of time. So if anyone tells you, there he is out in the wilderness, don't go out. Or here he is in the inner rooms. Don't believe it. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. Now, learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. As you might imagine, there are a lot of people who cannot agree about what is going on in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. There are at least two big ideas. One is that Jesus is focusing on what's going to happen in Jerusalem in just a few years before many of these men are dead. Or that Jesus is looking way down the road at the end of all things. Which one is it?
Way down the road. It has to be.
I personally believe that it's probably both. Because there are some things that Jesus talks about in that chapter that are going to be fulfilled not in 100 years or 1,000 years or 2,000 years, but things that are going to be fulfilled before John is dead as an old man at the age of 90 something. But there are some of the aspects of what he talks about that clearly are way out there. Okay. I am not trying to convince you of any specific perspective on what Jesus says here on the Mount of Olives. Because I'm not smart enough to know what the absolutely perfectly correct answer is. As I said, I believe that Jesus is looking at things that are about to occur as well as things that are going to be coming in the longer away future, and kind of how some of what's going to happen immediately is kind of a foreshadowing of what is going to come. Okay. Okay, I already said all those things. So, sitting on the top of the Mount of Olives, watching the sun go down behind the holy city, and Jesus begins to answer their question. I mean, they've had the whole time to walk down into the valley and then back up from the valley to go, what in the world did Jesus mean when he says the temple's going to fall down? What's that all about? So when they get there, they turn around and sit down, and he gives them this talk. All three gospel accounts are pretty similar. There are a few variations. Here are the things that we know for sure that Jesus talks about. First, that the temple and all the buildings around it are going to be destroyed. He says not one stone is going to be left standing. Now, I'll tell you, having been there and seeing the size of the stones that are used, and knowing that they did that without a bulldozer or a crane or a forklift or dynamite, they're huge stones. And Jesus says they're all going to get torn down. It's going to be an absolute wasteland. Jesus lets his disciples know that there are going to be people who come professing either to be sent from the Messiah or to be the Messiah himself. And if somebody shows up later, once he's gone, is this sort of the understood between the lines deal. Once he's no longer there, if somebody comes saying, I'm the Messiah, they shouldn't believe it. Jesus says that there are going to be some significantly disastrous and devastating things that are going to take place. Rumors of war, actual war, famine, earthquakes, all the most horrible things that that humanity can think about, that those are going to occur. We'll come back there. What he is trying to show is that in his absence and until his return, that if those things occur, they shouldn't be surprised. And they're not necessarily a sign that Jesus is, coming on the coattails of it just like right now. And it's kind of interesting that we had a massive, huge earthquake 2 days ago. I'm sure that there are people in the wake of the earthquake and the tsunamis and the flooding that have taken place since then that are looking for Jesus to return, which is probably not wrong because we're always getting closer to his return. But I believe the point he's making here is that war and earthquake and famine are kind of just a thing, and they're going to occur. It's not because some Messiah is bringing it about. It's because you live in a fallen world that is susceptible to evil, and so these things are going to exist. He says that for sure the followers of Jesus are going to be persecuted. 3 times in this chapter, Jesus mentions tribulation. Matthew, points to that trouble and tribulation trials. And he says that kind of trouble is going to start soon. Well, we know that it is real soon. As soon as Jesus dies and is resurrected and then ascends into heaven and leaves the disciples on their own, pretty much as soon as you get to Acts chapter 2, Acts chapter 3, the Jewish leadership are trying to shut down the disciples and get rid of this Jesus talk. They're arresting them, beating them, throwing them in jail, or worse. Jesus says this kind of persecution is going to take place, and it will, all the way until the end. But don't be discouraged by that. The message is hold your ground. Don't give up. Remain faithful. Stand firm, because those who stand firm to the end will not be abandoned by God. God's Holy Spirit will always be with them, and there is a reward for remaining faithful. There is one verse in there that always kind of grabs my attention. What number is it? Is it 14? Yeah. The gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Mark says something similar, and the gospel must be first preached to all nations. I have heard at least one really good preacher say that the fastest way for us to ensure for Jesus to return is to get the gospel message to every single corner of the world, that every every tribe, every nation, every language gets to hear about Jesus. And then, according to their understanding of those two verses, Matthew and Mark, then the end will come. That may be true, but I believe absolutely without a question of at all that Jesus is saying that rather than giving up in the face of persecution, you'll remain faithful. You keep spreading the message so more and more people can believe. It is the thing that will keep people alive for eternity. So do not stop sharing the gospel message, especially if he's talking to the disciples. Look, you're going to get arrested. You're going to get thrown in jail. You're going to get beaten. You're going to be executed. I'm not saying this to run you off. I'm just letting you know it's going to happen. But do not stop with the message of the kingdom. You keep preaching and teaching what I've taught you. Don't stop. You got to keep going. You're not going to be abandoned. And we get to see that unfold like in Acts chapter 4, when Peter and John get called in front of the Jewish leadership to testify as to what in the world it is that they're doing. They don't have any words to say, but the Holy Spirit gives them the things to say. And the leaders realize these are just dumb fishermen. Where did they learn to talk like this? Where did they get all this wisdom? It's because God's Holy Spirit is there. Even though they're being arrested and beaten, flogged, and then sent out with a warning, don't talk about this anymore. They can't stop talking about it because Jesus has said, don't stop talking about it. Jesus says that there's going to be betrayal in families. This whole attitude of hatred towards Jesus and his message is going to bring division. Husband from wife, parents from children, brothers from sisters. The truth about Jesus is divisive. We want to get along. We want to be tolerant. We want to be accepting. But at some point, we can't tolerate everything. Light doesn't have anything to do with darkness. Salt water doesn't have anything to do with fresh water. There's going to be division. Families will turn each other in. From when Jesus is speaking all the way through until the very end. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. And then he talks about the abomination that causes desolation. If you have been a part of one of our earlier studies in the book of Daniel, you may sort of remember that phrase. In Daniel 11, the prophet Daniel talks about that very phrase, the abomination that causes desolation. He is looking specifically at his point in history in captivity in Babylon, sometime in the 500s before Jesus. He's looking down the road at a horrible little ruler who's going to come in, a Roman who's going to come in and do terrible things in Jerusalem. That ruler's name is Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes. He's awful. He comes into the city, he lays siege to it. There's a lot of destruction, and one of the biggest, grossest things that he does is he sacrifices a hog on the temple altar to the god Zeus, which a pig is an unclean animal. They're offering it to worship a false god. It is desecrating the holy altar. That's happening like 350 years after Daniel prophesies about it. Here, Jesus looks back at that deal and Antiochus Epiphanes, and he applies it to the situation that is ahead for Jerusalem and really the rest of humanity. Sort of like, if you thought that was bad, wait until you see what's going to happen next. Because it won't just be desecrated. The temple is going to be destroyed. Everything will be carried off, burnt to the ground. There'll be nothing left. The people of God are going to be, they're going to be destroyed, tortured, arrested, killed, run off. It's going to be bad. There's going to be more war coming. In AD 70, like from the middle 60s up through AD 70, there is going to be a war between the Jews and the Romans. The Romans are going to win. It's not a fair fight. And they're going to destroy the city. Jesus talks about great distress, like arrest, torture, and even death that are going to follow. But he says that it won't be long. It's not permanent. Sort of thankfully, it's going to be an abbreviated period for the sake of the elect, for the sake of the church. This isn't going to last on. It's not going to last forever. Another thing that Jesus puts into this talk on the side of the hill is that when he returns, whatever that looks like, it won't be something that you wonder about. There won't be speculation that the Messiah has returned. It will be abundantly clear to everybody all at once. You know, we can see a lightning strike out in the desert, and we know what has happened. There won't be any question. And then he uses this fig tree as a parable. Probably not the same fig tree that he withered last week. But when you look at a fig tree, you know, they all see figs all the time. They grow every place. You can eat a fig dry, right off the tree. You can eat it once it's been cured in the sun and dried out. Fresh or preserved, you can eat it. But everybody knows what that looks like. In the spring, the stems get soft and green, and leaves start to grow, and buds start to form, and then you know summer's on the way. Our bus driver used to tell us about the middle of April when I was a kid, as we were driving around the country roads, past a lilac bush. He would say, "Now, you see that lilac bush right there? When that blooms, then you know it's almost time for school to be out." That's the same sort of thing that Jesus is doing here. You all know how figs work. You know how fig trees grow. When you see the leaves coming on, you know summer's on the way. It won't be long now. And so when you see these kinds of things taking place, you'll know that the end is on its way. There won't be a question about if the Messiah is going to return, because you'll be able to see that all these things are taking place. And then he makes the point that this generation isn't going to pass away until these things have occurred. And they're all going to happen at just the right time, just like they should. So, because of all of that, I feel like the immediate application of what Jesus is talking about here is the destruction of Jerusalem that's going to happen in the year 70, which is 35 to 40 years away. It's going to come, it's going to happen, and he's letting everybody know that it's going to occur. And then all that will happen before all of these disciples have died. And you can look at history and you can see wars and rumors of wars and all these other terrible things, that there's persecution of the church that's going to start as soon as Jesus is gone. They persecuted him, they're going to persecute his followers. That's going to exist all the way through for nearly 300 years until Constantine makes it an official religion. There's going to be persecution of the church. There's going to be all this stuff take place. And then when you look at what happened in the year 70, when Titan is his name, lays siege to the city, people do flee for the hills. If they can get away, they do. Josephus, you might be familiar with his name. He's a historian that's writing in the period after Jesus. And he talks about the way that the Romans fought against the Jews, the way the Jews fought back against the Romans. And some of the stories that he tells are awful. It is a horrible time. Like, there's no food. They've been trapped in the city, trapped wherever they are. They can't get any food. There's nothing growing. And so mothers are eating their own children. It's an awful, terrible, horrible thing. Just kind of like what Jesus lays out here. But I don't think that Jesus is sharing all this information about the immediate future of Jerusalem or the long-term return of the Son to scare them. I think it is to prepare them for what's coming and to make sure that they understand the best and most important thing that they can do is to remain faithful, to live very carefully and very thoughtfully, very intentionally, and to just keep on praying all the time. Do not get disconnected from God. Do not allow your faith to waver. You walk the right path, and it might be scary. You may die, but there is a reward. Don't give up. One of the commentaries that I was looking at this week said better than I could: the destruction of the holy city is the definitive earthly expression of God's covenant wrath against the unbelief of the majority of the Jewish people. God promised a Messiah to his people. He told them what the Messiah would look like, what they should expect. And when the Messiah arrived, they rejected him. And because the bulk of God's people, the Israelites, Judah, the Jews, rejected him, there is this devastating punishment placed upon them. But thankfully, God made another way, not just for the Jews, but for anybody who would believe in Jesus as the Messiah, to be saved, maybe not from this earthly destruction, but to be saved for eternity. Now, there is a whole bunch of stuff that we could get way down deep in the weeds on about trying to interpret all this stuff. The Jack Van Impe thing, interpreting, which way does he do it? Interpreting today's events in view of God's word, or God's word in view of today's, I forget which way it goes. But, it's just trying to put the newspaper and the Bible side by side and kind of jive them all up. You can do that if you want to. I think there's room for it here, because I think really the biggest point that Jesus makes is that those that kind of stuff it starts after his death and it runs all the way until the end of all things. There has been persecution since Jesus left, and it will continue. There has been hatred for Jesus and his people since he left, and that will continue. Because of the hard-hearted, unloving, discompassionate attitude that people have for each other, there will be war, there will be rumor of war, there will be famine, there will be lack of care for basic needs. People are going to go without. There'll be time of great distress. It's been true since Jesus left, and it's going to be true until the very end. But rather than being discouraged and wringing our hands and hanging our heads and just, going sitting on a rock waiting for Jesus to come back, our job is to make sure that we're sharing that good news with others about the love that God has for us in Jesus. So don't give up. Don't give up. What are your thoughts about all of that? I told you I was not really looking forward to chapter 24.
You don't like it because it's Revelation-esque, perhaps.
It's because I don't love prophecy. I had that conversation with Stacy last night on the way to small group. Like, you know me, I hate all this kind of stuff. Trying to interpret and understand, I feel like it doesn't really do any good. You just gotta do what's right when it's right. You stay faithful, and who it's gonna be what it's gonna be.
Well, I've been in your Revelation class, and I've been in your Daniel, and I know that you've said, especially with Revelation, is the main things that the whole thing is hang on. I got this.
Yeah.
Stay, I got your back, stay the course. And I've thought in my mind several times that it's not just Revelation, that's really the kind of thing in the whole Bible. God saying to his people, if you will stick with me, if you will be faithful, I got this. Well, if you'll, stay the course.
Israel is clearly the bad poster child for that all the way through the Old Testament and the Jews in the New Testament. You had the truth, you had the law, you should have known, but you just kept turning away. You just kept turning away. Just remain faithful. And Cody's right. Everybody, when you give a group of people who are Christians an opportunity, what do you want to study in the Bible? Ooh, always top 3, Revelation. Everybody wants to read Revelation and understand it. There are guys who'll do that with you, but I'm not one of them. I have taught Revelation here, but like Cody has so eloquently summarized, the point of Revelation is not to understand who the beasts are and who the horns are and who's that lady who's riding on the dragon and all that stuff. Most of that information was lost in the first century. The whole point of the book, the whole point of Revelation and the point of the Bible is remain faithful to God. If you remain faithful, there's a great reward. If you don't remain faithful, you're not going to like it. You're just not going to like it at all. It's going to be bad. So choose Jesus, remain faithful, and all this other stuff kind of works itself out. Now, if you want to do a deep study and you want to interpret all of that Revelation stuff and try to apply it to 2,000 years of history, by all means, you have my blessing. Go right ahead. You can even talk to me about it, but I won't have any hard, fast answers because I don't think at this point that there can be. So A lot of what Jesus says here, this is in my notes, I don't say it. A lot of what Jesus talks about here about the loud sound and being collected from the four corners of the earth, that sort of shows up later in Paul's writings, like in 1 Thessalonians 4, about the second advent of Jesus, when he comes back again. I don't think it is either or. I think it is both and. I think it is right here, what's going to happen in Jerusalem soon, as well as in the long term. This is how you need to be living so you're prepared for the return of the Son of Man in the future. Anything else you all would like to discuss? Not now.
Not after that speech.
There are a couple things at the end of Mark and at the end of Luke that Matthew doesn't include. Mark says nobody knows the time. So stay on your toes. It's probably not in the next 4 minutes, but it might be. So you'd better be ready. If you knew that you'd gotten a letter from the White House that said that the president and all of his entourage were going to be in Weber County and they were going to stop by your house, whether you love the president or not, you would get things ready. And you would stay ready knowing that it was going to happen at some point real soon. You would not let people take off their dirty socks and leave them in the middle of the floor. They wouldn't have their ice cream bowls sitting on the couch. There wouldn't be wet towels hanging off of the banister. You wouldn't let that kind of thing happen because you know that he's coming for a visit. And so you get ready and you stay ready. That's what Jesus is trying to teach the disciples. You gotta stay ready all the time. Always be living like the sun is coming, and you'll be prepared.
So you brought it up, you got it started, I wasn't gonna say it.
But I did.
Yes, you did, so you dug us back into it a little bit. But now what is he referring to when he says this generation?
Well, it would seem like the obvious application is the generation of the people that he's talking to. So of these disciples, because that is clear that this is not huge crowds of people that he's talking to. This is the disciples with whom he has had this really sort of close conversation. This generation isn't going to die until all these things have happened. And we do know that John lives to be an old man in his 90s, well after the destruction of Jerusalem. That's what I'm going with. Are there other understandings of it? Yeah. Okay. Well then. We will mark it here. We'll pick up with Matthew 25 next time. Some sheep and some goats. That'll be even more fun. So we'll be right back here again next Thursday at 10 in Matthew 25, and we'll see where else we end up. All right. If you happen to be watching online, by all means, please, make a comment. Subscribe to the channel so you see every time we post something. I'm sure you'll be glad you did. Plus, you can comment on whatever my wardrobe choices happen to be. That seems to be a fairly popular thing in the last couple of weeks. So we'll talk to you later.